I love a good story, and I really love my story. And today I want to tell it. I want to tell it as it is. I want to tell it in all of its good, bad, and ugly. My name's Bronwen Healy, and my story is brutal but beautiful. When I think back on my story and I think about my childhood, the amount of times I've told this story over the last 20 plus years as a, out there public storyteller, and I think back on my childhood, I used to tell the story in a different way. And my thoughts on it have changed over the years, through my own evolving, my unbecoming, my unraveling, how many wilderness seasons can one woman survive, all of that. And I used to tell the story and start it with, hi, I'm Bronwen Healy, I'm this many years old. I was born to an alcoholic dad. And when I thought about this process and this storytelling, and who I am now and where I'm at now, it's still true. I was born to an alcoholic dad, I think back on my life story and I think about what my life is now and the life I've lived in all of those days and all of those seasons. I tell the story now is I was born to an alcoholic dad. When I turned 3, he joined a self-help program and everything changed. The atmosphere of our house changed. It went from dark and angry and violent and aggressive, and something that I wouldn't want to sit here and talk about today, to my mum and dad loved me the best way they knew how. And when I think about my story now, if they'd have not made the choices that they made to love me the best way they knew how, and was it the best, and was it the greatest, and was it the perfect childhood? No. But can I look back on my story and see them through eyes of grace now? Yeah. And so my dad was an alcoholic till I was 3, and then he joined a self-help program. My mum got wildly invested in the community that was that self-help program. And I don't remember a day or a night going by that the kettle wasn't on, the tea bag jar was full. The old phones with the wire cords, and mum just on the phone. Her whole life changed when phones became cordless, but the phone was ringing. People wanted help. They wanted support. They wanted someone to hear their story. So when I thought about this process and telling this story now from where I am now, all I could think about is my whole life has revolved around story. My whole life, my child dining table was full of people being seen, being known, and being loved. There's stories woven together. I grew up in a tapestry of love. I grew up in a tapestry of love. This woman, my mum, didn't know any different than to make sure that there was always tea and coffee, unfortunately international roast, in the tins. But I'm talking my memory, getting ready for this opportunity to tell this story, was these international roast tins that were this big, and packets and packets of Lipton tea bags. And the table was always full and the phone was always ringing. I didn't have the world's healthiest boundaries. I've definitely learned a lot about boundaries through her lack of boundaries, but not one person that ever sat on the other end of that phone or at that table or at a park where she'd hosted some gathering. It was always potluck, bring a plate, which is why my life now is still bring a plate, potluck. There's got to be a better word for it, but it's that. It's come and bring your true self. So when I think back on my childhood, I realized why I love story. My dad was a projectionist, so he was the dude that rolled the films and, put them up in the cinemas and showed the films. And so I grew up around story, around the table, and I grew up around film. I used to pretend that I was sick so that I could go to school, go to work with my dad, because he worked at Swinburne Film Institute. and I learned how to splice film, when I was young. I remember my dad years later saying, you remember you met Baz Luhrmann? And I was like, what? But I learned the power of story and the art of story and the telling of stories. And I love genre after genre after genre. I'm not like in one box. I think about the way that my mum and dad loved me the best way they knew how, the way they tried to love each other the best way they knew how. I have one brother who's 5 years older than me. And I was thinking about telling this story, and I was thinking about his translation of the story would be so different. When we tell stories and it's like, I have my truth. My mum and dad would have their versions and their translations. My brother would have another. But I've always seen my life like a film. Like I see in film. When I have a memory, like getting ready for this day, I saw myself sitting at that dining table. Could feel it. I remember, everything was yellow and green. The yellow and green teacups and the wallpaper. But I remember thinking, my mum's love of people and my dad's love of film has become my life story. Like I see it, I can feel it, I can sense it. And I like to take people on a journey. And when I think back to my childhood, and I think they introduced me to that, they didn't know any different. They wanted people to have what they'd learned. Because the story before I turned 3 was dark and violent and horrible. And I'm sure there's parts of me that would remember it. But when I was getting ready for today, the memory was that circle dining table, the pine. I was born in 1975, we had a pine dining table and a pine hut and green and yellow crockery and tea and coffee and stories and people and the weaving together of a tapestry of love that has helped shape who I am. The way that they poured love into me even when they had nothing left in their tanks. The way the choices that they made to get engaged in a community that for them brought life and it brought understanding. And for them it was like, we're not alone. We aren't the only people who have lived through alcoholism, who have lived through pain, who have lived through, feeling abandoned and isolated and all of these things because of this disease. They were community builders. And they gave me my love of people, which is hilarious because my dad's actually quite introvert, but mum was always making up for that. And just that power of story, and it's who I am. And so the honor and privilege of getting to do this today, in the chapter of life that I'm living now, I can't think of anything greater. Again, when I reflect on my childhood, one of the highlights for me, and it's like I say to my kids all the time, I'm so glad that I was born when I was. I'm so glad that I was born in 1975 and I got to grow up in when I think about their lives now and even their childhoods, 18, 20, 22 years ago. I think about being born in that era where, like you were allowed to ride your bike, you were allowed to, it was go have fun, go and play. And when I think about my childhood, I have some friendships that some are still, true and dear to me now. But I think of movies like The Goonies and Stand By Me, and they were my people. And I had friends, I grew up in Melbourne and in a suburb called Moonee Ponds, also made famous by Dame Edna Everage, however, also the home of Bronwen, which I think is more important. But grew up on one side of the Moonee Valley Racecourse, and so I lived on one side and school was on the other. And I had friends that one came from here and he collected that person and they collected me, and we walked around and we walked to school. And we have stories and memories, literally like Stand By Me or The Goonies. You know, our imaginations were the wildest of adventures. It was either that or my mum driving me to school in the Tirana that was made of like the hardest metal you could remember. And I don't know how many times she backed into the electrical pole outside, but she'd come out with her hair in rollers, with her fag hanging, you know, cigarette hanging out of her mouth. It was Melbourne, so we'd have to boil the kettle to get the like sleet off the front windscreen. She was never a morning person, and so it was like, Mum, I've got to get to school, you know, and she comes out with her cigarette. We clear the glass and she'd bump into the electrical pole and drive me around the corner to school. The adventures and the memories. But one of my friends, I think about my gift of empathy and my love of coming alongside people, and again, getting ready for this privileged opportunity to tell my story, you know. And I was thinking back to this friend who I met when I was 4 years old, and we went to the same kindy, and he had asthma. And other kids would make fun of him and, you know, like, look at him and he can't be included. And I remember as a 4-year-old little girl sitting down with him at the sandbox and putting my arm around his shoulder. Like, I see you, I got you. I didn't know what asthma was. I didn't know, I just saw that he was by himself. And when I think about those first 3 years of my life, and yet by the age of 4 already, I was looking to come alongside the one. And when I think about back to then and I think about now, and the joys and the beauties of Facebook and being able to stay connected to people like that in your story. But I think back to no matter what my life has looked like and no matter the brutal that's come alongside my journey, it's always been about coming alongside people. I was 4 years old, sitting down by the side of a sandbox, just like, hey bro, I got you. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And I didn't know what it meant and I didn't know why. But something about who I am and the way that I'm wired and the way that my mum lived her life gave me the freedom to find joy in coming alongside people, no matter who they were and no matter where they were at. And again, thinking about the journey of my life and the tapestry of love and the legacy of love and, you know, all of those things. But that joy and that beauty of coming alongside someone, not knowing who they were, what their story was, and it didn't matter. I don't ever want to lose that. I don't ever want to lose the wonder of what that means, because I know what it feels like to be seen and known and loved. But I just think back to that and I just am like, I was 4 years old and I can see it in that memory box. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the way that I'm wired. I'm grateful for the way my heart is. And I'm grateful for the way that I see people. I'm grateful for those memories. I'm grateful for the opportunity to remember the memories. Yeah. So when I was 13, I grew up in Melbourne. So we came up to Queensland for a holiday. And it was kind of like, you know, Dream World, Sea World, the beach. And I was like, this is amazing. I think that we should live in Queensland. So we go back to Melbourne. I'm about to turn 13. Same old dining table. And I remember sitting at the dining table saying to my parents, I think we should move to Queensland. And they were like, that's a great idea. And I was like, hold on, wait. You become an almost teenager and you get to tell your parents what to do? But it wasn't that. I found out later that my dad had already accepted a job at Expo 88 here in Queensland, and we were moving anyway. They were hoping I'd fall in love with the place. And what I didn't know at the time was that my brother, who then was almost 18, was staying in Melbourne with our family dog named Rocky. And I remember just being like, as much as he and I were never really close in my childhood. We were still a family unit. You're kind of like, what happens to us? What happens to the fabric of us? What happens? And it was before mobile phones and, like staying connected to an 18-year-old guy when you're a 13-year-old kid, sister. How do we stay connected? And I'm gonna miss my dog, Anyway, we moved to Brisbane, and I always say I'm really glad that we moved in 1988 when we had World Expo, because I got an annual pass and I went to a different place every afternoon. And I think it helped the transition from those friendships, those Stand By Me friendships that I'd grown up with, the same friends, the same life, the same route to school every day, to the unknown. And I realized that when you pick up and you move away from what has been your life, your whole life, I only knew one home, and I had all those friends, and they were good, beautiful, deep friendships. And we got up here and I was like, who am I? My mum and dad went into debt to send me to an elite private girls' school, and I didn't know who I was. And I did know that my parents did not drive a Ferrari or a Porsche, and our house was definitely not on the river. And I definitely had never been to Aspen for any kind of holiday. And I felt out of place, felt like I didn't belong. A lot of it was just identity stuff, like who am I? I'm 13. I've moved away from everything that I know and everything that's familiar. But I also I wasn't necessarily welcomed in and woven in. I think about my childhood and that the way that my mum wove people into story and into community and into our family. And once you were in our family, you were adopted in, And so I'm in this elite private girls' school not knowing who I was and not feeling like I fitted in, and starting to ask those questions, who am I? Where do I fit? How do I fit? For most of grade 8, 9, 10, ages 13, 14, 15, I didn't fit in. I didn't know how to fit in, going to the guidance officer being like, these girls are mean, and her being like, Bronwen, find something you're passionate about, join a group. I joined an art group and realized when I joined the art group that I really love art, have a great love of things that are creative, but I'm not very good at art. I love writing and I love movies, but I'm not very good at creating art. And so I realized in that place that what happened to me wasn't I failed at the thing. I didn't think I failed the art group. I thought I'm a failure. And it became a part of my identity. The labels that other people were putting on me, talking about me, around me, those things started to become a part of who I was, that fabric of who I am. And when you're 13, 14, 15, and you don't know who you are and you don't know where you fit, you try to do what you can to fit. And you might break and shape and mold yourself in a way that says, I think this is who I am. I don't actually really know who I am, but this could be it. And so I ended up, I tried the art group, I tried basketball. I'm sitting down today, but I am 5'3", and I was then and I am now. And the thought of my kids laugh at the thought of me running and dribbling a ball at the same time, never been the most coordinated of people. Was I setting myself up for failure? Then they start to ask you that elusive question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm 15, I am grown up, excuse me. I know most things. And I realized in a session with that same guidance counselor that told me to try and find a way to fit in, I remember saying to her, I'm going to make movies and go to Hollywood. I want to tell stories. I want to tell stories through the power of film. And I remember her being like, well, this school doesn't offer film and TV. I remember going home, again, different dining table, different setting, but I can still see it in my head. I remember saying to my mum and dad, I'm going to make movies and go to Hollywood. I need to find a school that offers film and TV. If I find a school that offers film and TV, can I go? Kind of like a preempt, spoiler alert, can I? And they said yes. And I, again, days before Google, opened up the phone book, tried to find ways to find a school that was known for film and TV. And I found a school that was known for film and TV on the opposite side of town. The fact that they even let me go for an interview when I lived 2 train rides away. But I expressed my passion for film and storytelling, and they let me go. And I remember telling Mum and Dad that I'd been accepted into this school, and it's well known for film and TV. And they were like, we've read about that school in the newspaper. It's also known for gangs and drugs. And I was like, okay, I know how to say no. I also knew how to say yes, but I didn't know that at the time because I still didn't know who I was. And so I went to that school against my parents' better judgment. Every time I've told this story in the last 20 years, like, and make sure you let people know it was against our better judgment. And now I'm a parent, I totally get that disclaimer. And I remember going to that school, and on my first day, someone saying to me at lunchtime, hey, do you want to come to the park and smoke pot? And me being like, smoke pot? No. I had tried alcohol by then, but I mean, my dad's history with alcoholism meant it wasn't really a way that I didn't really, get into it the way that my friends were getting into it. And I was like, no, smoke pot, no. And then the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day, I became friends with this motley crew of still, when I think back on that season of story and friendship, another wild, eclectic bunch of humans who are so dear to my heart. Gee, we had fun. And my mum was always like, get them to come over, everyone come for a sleepover. She would stock the fridge with chocolate Yogo, and there'd be twisties and lollies, and she didn't know it's because they were stoned, or maybe she did. Maybe she did, and she just thought she'd provide for them. But come and be a part of our family and sit around the table and be seen and be known and be fed and be loved and be welcomed in. So that collection of people, and we had fun. I would say no to pot every day, and right, 2 weeks out from the end of grade 12. And I knew I had the grades to get to uni to study. I was doing a Bachelor of Humanities, majoring in film and media. And 2 weeks out from the end of grade 12, and someone offered me pot, and I said yes. I think in my head, I thought that I deserved a treat. I'd come so far. I mean, I saw them smoke it, and I was just like, whatever, they were my people. So I said yes, and got stoned, and probably became like a social experiment. I'm glad that smartphones weren't around then, because there'd be videos that I could never get rid of. The memories, the moments. And the next day I smoked pot again, and the next day and the next day and the next day. Finished grade 12. We went away for a week to northern New South Wales, and at that place was speed, ecstasy, cocaine, LSD. I tried a few different things. Didn't really remember all of it, but I think in my head I thought, that was fun. By the time I got from the end of grade 12 to the start of university, which they say is only 4 months long, I had experienced enough party drugs and designer drugs to realize I actually quite like them. And I thought that they were bringing more joy to my life. I thought that the fun and the memories I was making with these people I'd remember, which mostly I didn't. Still didn't know who I was. Started university, and even on that first day, there was a group of kids who probably have won awards and are in Hollywood making movies right now. And there was a group of kids that were going to the pub to get drunk at lunchtime. And I ended up going with them, and we got drunk and we smoked pot, and I was at a crossroads. And I made a choice. And so I barely scraped through my first year at university. Was in a relationship with a guy who, again, some really beautiful, sweet memories. I broke his heart. And in breaking his heart, I kind of broke my own spirit. I don't even know why I did it. I couldn't look back and be like, it was this, it was that. But I fell out of that relationship into a relationship with a guy that was known to be a heroin addict. I was 18 years old. And everybody said to me, I was known by that stage for, smoke pot all day and the party drugs, and the weekends were, the days were getting longer. The weekends were getting longer. And I remember everyone saying to me, you're going to end up a junkie, you're going to end up a heroin addict. And I was like, wow, thanks for the votes of confidence, which is why now I'm so big on people finding their people. Find your people and have people around you that are going to love you and truly fully see you and encourage goodness and beauty and joy and memories and adventure, yes. But people that are going to see you and that they're going to call out the goodness and the greatness and the gold. I remember thinking, I think a part of me thought that I could save him. I knew his family story. His mum had died to heroin through, Hep C, and, just all this mess and loss and brokenness, and thinking of the family that I'd grown up in and that love and that weaving together and that tapestry of love, and come sit around the table and be seen. I didn't realize the impact and the power that those drugs were going to have. And we, sex, drugs and rock and roll, and sometimes when you have sex, you get pregnant when you're 18 and you don't know who you are and you don't know what you're doing. And I remember sitting in the doctor's surgery with my heroin addicted partner and her looking at me saying, your really only option is to have a termination. Didn't say if you do, you might end up guilty, feeling guilty. You might feel ashamed. You might regret it. You might end up resenting him or yourself. And she made a phone call, and 3 days later I went to an abortion clinic and had a termination of a life that had purpose, that had future, that had destiny, that was handcrafted. And I took it into my own hands. And I didn't know any different, except that 2 days later, when I came out of the pot-induced depressive state of sleep, all I wanted to do was be numb. I didn't want to think and I didn't want to feel. Nobody could have, could they have told me? Should they have told me? Would I have listened? Was I listening? I don't know. But the shame was so real, and I would have not known how to name it, but I just felt sad. I just felt sad. I want to be numb. I don't want to think. I don't want to feel. And this heroin addicted boyfriend who had no idea what I was going through and didn't really care. I would say every day, can I have some heroin? Just a little bit. I just don't want to think and I don't want to feel. No, I love you too much. I'd never give you heroin. A couple of weeks later, I'd been working in the cinema for a long time. I had money saved up. And he came to me one day and he said, do you still want to try heroin? I was like, well, yeah, I've been asking every day. I don't want to think and I don't want to feel. And I knew that they were the words. That's what I didn't want. And he was like, okay, can I borrow some money and I'll buy some heroin and you can try it. And that night I had maybe $20 worth of heroin. I was sick. I was laying on the floor. I remember vomiting in the toilet. I remember waking up the next day and thinking, that was the best vomit of my life. I didn't think. I couldn't feel. It disconnected me from reality, and that was all I wanted. So the next day I was like, can I have some more? No, I love you too much. 3 or 4 days later, he wanted to borrow money to buy more heroin, and I said that he could if he gave me some more. Within 2 weeks, I was using heroin every day. And I very quickly went from trying a little bit of heroin or $20 worth of heroin to $25 to $30 to $40 to $50 a day. How is that sustainable? How is that long-term sustainable? His family grew marijuana and sold marijuana. He would buy drugs off someone and sell it to somebody else. And there was little dribbles and drabbles of money. But, within that first year, I was stealing from my job. walked into work one day and my boss looked at me and he said, "We know what you've been doing. We know you've been falsifying tickets, you know?" And he said, "You have a choice to make. You either need to go to jail or rehab. We don't want to have to call the police, so we really hope that you choose rehab." I didn't realize how bad I'd gotten, how quick I'd gotten there. I didn't notice at the time that the good friendships, even though they were, messy and, eclectic collection of people, they would have not wanted me to go that way. And they disappeared, or I disappeared from them. And everything became about this drug and this relationship that was so unhealthy and so dysfunctional. Everything was about numbing my pain and not thinking and not feeling. The opposite of everything really I'd been raised to be, just telling the story like I had been woven in to be connected and I was choosing to disconnect. I told my boss that I needed time to think about what I wanted to do, and I caught the bus home, and when I got home, the boyfriend was like, "What are you doing here?" Like, as in, "Where's the money that you stole from work today to buy us more heroin?" And I told him I'd been fired, and the only thing that I had left at that time was my body. We'd sold everything else. We'd stolen from family and friends, and we were living in a squat. And I just remember looking at him and just saying, I'm gonna ring an escort agency and just do prostitution. Now, why in that moment did I not think, I should go to rehab, I should stop taking drugs? Because I didn't want to think and I didn't want to feel. I didn't want to live in whatever that current reality was. I didn't want to live there. I didn't want to stay there. And I literally opened up, back then, the old school yellow pages, and I looked up escort agencies, and I looked up the first name, and I made one phone call, and the lady said to me, "How old are you?" At that stage, I was almost 21. And she said, "Are you pretty?" This is just over the phone on the payphone, "Are you pretty?" Well, my mum thinks I am. I don't know if by that stage my mum would have thought I was. I tried to avoid my mum by that stage as much as possible. My mum thinks I am. "Can you come for an interview?" So I had to borrow heroin off my dealer to get high enough to be able to go do this interview. And she literally met me and said, "Can you start tonight?" Gave me a tour of an illegal brothel. This is not about intimacy. This is about sex. This is a transaction. If only she'd have said, "You'll be selling your body and your soul to strangers for money, to buy the drugs that are going to nearly destroy your life over and over and over and over again." But to her, all she saw was this almost 20-year-old heroin addicted fresh meat. And on that night, every cent that I made selling my body and soul to strangers for money, I spent on heroin for me and my boyfriend. And then I became known as the new girl, and so you make more money and you make more money and you sell your body and your soul. That season of my life, that chapter of my story, was the darkest, most soul-destroying time of my life. The choices that I made, the person I became, the level of disconnection, working in this illegal brothel for my madam, who was my heroin dealer. She didn't even pay me in money to go and buy heroin. She paid me in heroin. And I was getting ready for work one night, dressed to have sex with strangers, and there was a knock at the door. And it wasn't the kind of knock I'd heard before when the police were coming, or some regular client that thought, he could whisk me away and marry me, or some ridiculous idea. It wasn't that kind of knock. And I remember hearing my madam open the door, and all I could hear was a man's voice say, "Hi, I'm here to see Bronwen, I'm her uncle." And the next voice that I heard was my mum. I do not know to this day how they found me. But I was dressed to go to work as a prostitute. And in walks the mum who had always loved me the best way that she knew how. I had disappeared. Again, before mobile phones, before Find My Phone, I had disappeared from her life because I wanted to disappear from my own. I wanted to unweave myself from the story of love because I didn't feel like I deserved it. And here she was, sitting on the couch in an illegal brothel, looking at her daughter, who had always, in her mind, been an angel child. Wanting to weave me back into the story. With that look of, there's nothing you could ever do to make me love you any more or any less. I just love you. It doesn't matter how many days, weeks, months you've been gone. I just love you. She didn't use words because she didn't need to. It was the eye contact across the room. And as she left, she wrote down her phone number and she said, use it at any time. I'm not going anywhere. It wasn't that night, it was weeks or even months later that I remember saying to another friend who was also a heroin addict, I need to get out of the sex industry. It's going to kill me. It's going to kill me or I'm going to kill me. And I remember him locking me in his, at my free will, locking me in his room. Now, what heroin addict wants another heroin addict to get off heroin? Because it's so entrenched and you're just in it together. He was worried for my life. I got off heroin and I'd stay off heroin for a week and think I deserved a treat, and my only thing that I knew to have a treat was more heroin. Or I'd stay off heroin for like 2 weeks and be like, I deserve a treat, and I'd have speed or ecstasy or cocaine. And the only way to come back from that was heroin. So I danced with death for another couple of years, in and out, not of the sex industry. My only vow to myself was to never go back. But I'd sleep with other guys and I'd get money and I'd get heroin, and I didn't think it was the same as being in the sex industry. Or I'd sleep with someone and they'd give me drugs and I'd think that that was somehow different. I still didn't know who I was. And by this stage, I was 24 years old. I remember calling my mum. Her and dad lived on the sunny coast at that time, and asking her to help me detox, and them locking me in a room again at my choice. But I remember punching through the security windows. I remember punching my mum. I remember my dad calling the police. And I remember calling the madam drug dealer in my moment of desperation. She got me back to Brisbane. And it was either then I was going back into the sex industry or I was going to get out. Of all of the people, I called an ex-client and told him that I wanted to get clean off heroin. He put me up in his unit. He called my mum. She came and we found a doctor who treated drug addicts. I was 24 years old. And I sat in his surgery, and my mum sat with me, holding my hand, holding my heart in her hands, believing that that was going to be it. I had tried so many things. I had tried crystals, Buddha, acupuncture, meditation, travel, like go to Sydney, get clean, come back, get on heroin. But sitting in this doctor's surgery, my mum believed that that was it, that there was hope. Why in that moment? Why this doctor? Who knows? I was sitting in the doctor's surgery, 24 years old. I'd been on heroin on and off most days for about 6 years. Sitting in this doctor's surgery, and he looked at me and he was like, tell me your drug history, and I did. And then he said, I don't think drugs are your problem. And I'm thinking, dude, are you listening? Drugs are my problem. Drugs aren't your problem. Your problem is you have a hole in your soul only Jesus can fill. excuse me, very colourfully told him what I thought he could do with what he thought Jesus could do for me. He wrote down 2 phone numbers for 2 rehabs, and he said one of them's a Christian rehab and one of them is not. And in my head, I thought, surely the one that I call is going to be the non-Christian rehab. What Christian rehab's going to want this little black duck? Every second word was a swear word. I was angry, violent. My heart was so hard. My mind was so closed. I was the opposite of everything I'd been raised to be in that moment, and there sat my mum alongside me, reminding me that all those days I'd been woven into a tapestry of love, no matter how much I wanted to not be. You have a hole in your soul only Jesus can fill. Really? Made a phone call thinking it would be, the rehab that I thought I wanted to go to. And they said, we only have 1 spare bed at the moment. It's for a female. You can come in 2 days. I went, I signed the paperwork. And that night, someone came out with like a Bible and a guitar and started singing Jesus music. And I thought I was in the Twilight Zone. Like, who am I? What am I doing here? I was detoxing. They let me not come out for Bible studies, but on Sundays they'd drag you to church and I'd stand outside the building, blow my smoke inside to annoy the crap out of all the people in the building, And for 6 weeks, my language, my attitude, I was horrible, unkind, so angry, so hurt, and yet they did their Bible studies and they sang their Christian music. And what I think about that season and that chapter of my life is those people didn't just tell me that there was hope. They didn't just tell me. They showed me. They came alongside me. They came alongside me like I came alongside that little boy at the sandpit when I was 4 years old. And they put their arm around me and they saw me. They didn't see me where I was. They didn't see me stuck. They didn't see me trapped. They saw this. They saw beyond. They saw hope. So 6 weeks into the program, one Sunday, pouring rain, I had no choice but to go inside. I call it now a conspiracy from heaven. Sitting inside that building, don't remember anything about what the pastor preached about, much to probably his dismay. And at the end, he said, if there's anyone in here that wants forgiveness for their past, a brand new life today, and hope for their future, I'd love you to come to the front. I'm sitting in the back row thinking, we're a pack of drug addicts, surely someone in here needs that. But it wouldn't be me, right? What kind of loser would do that? And the next minute I was at the front and he's like, do you want to say a salvation prayer? I'm like, I don't know. Repeated some prayer I didn't understand. Apparently, got born again, gave my heart to Jesus and all those things that they tell you that you are. Welcome to the family. Welcome home. Welcome home. I didn't understand what had just happened, so I basically said to the pastor, can I say my own prayer? And in his mind, he said that he thought, I hope she doesn't swear her way to heaven. If anyone's going to do it. And what I said to this God who I didn't know was destined to be my best friend. If everything that they've told me about you is true, but everything they've shown me about you is true, I dare you to take me. He knew about this moment. He knew that I was not going to not just receive enough hope for me, that I was going to receive seeds of hope that I would plant into the heart, life story of every person whose path I was ever going to cross from that moment forward. August 15th, 1999 was the pivotal, life-transforming turning point in my story that got me to stand in a place where I could say that I knew that my past was not my future. It was a journey to understand that what I'd done was not who I am. What I've done is not who I am. What's been done to me is not who I am. Who I am is his, and who I am is loved. I just want to be a seed sower. And I want to see those seeds bloom and become acres of hope. And so I think back on the chapters of my story and the way they weave together to make me who I am today. And there's moments that, people will say things like, do you regret ever trying pot? Do you regret this? Do you regret that? Man, there'd be things that I think, if I changed that, but would I be who I am today? Would my 3 daughters be here? Would I be the friend that I am? Would I be the mum that I am? Would I be the daughter that I was? No. No, I wouldn't. And so I've had to learn to accept the forgiveness that could only come from heaven, that literally gave me a clean slate on that day and released me to walk out the rest of the days of my life, knowing that I'm never alone, knowing that my past is not my future, and it doesn't matter what season I have found myself in all of the days since that day, that now is not forever. Doesn't matter what that now looks like, the good, the bad, and the ugly, none of it's forever. That my life is a journey, that I walk a narrow road, but man, I tell you, the caliber of people that I've met along this journey. So would I change a thing? No. It's been brutal. It's been brutal, but it's been beautiful. And it's not, like I think about that Pantene ad, the old, it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. I'm a culmination of my story. I'm a culmination of the chapters that make up my story. I'm a culmination of all of the people whose lives I've had the honor and privilege of journeying alongside, but I'm also a culmination of those who have had the privilege of journeying alongside me and mine too. And I don't take that lightly. And I hold the story loosely. And I tell it, and I'll keep telling it for all of my days. Because I want everyone to know that they have a story to tell. We have a story to tell. The journey of my life so far. My past is not my future. But man, I'm so excited about my future, and again and again and again. So I think about my life, and I think about my story in like chapter versions, like in, now as a counselor, I love narrative therapy. I love helping people dive into their stories and look for treasure, even in the pain. There's ways that you can find treasure, and you can find growth, and you can unravel and unbecome, so that those parts of your story that we as humans wish that we could erase, that we know that we can't, can help us to see that it all makes up a part of who we are. So I think about the life that I live now as a, qualified counsellor, and I think back to those days in rehab, and all I ever wanted was to help other people know that there was hope. To help other people know that they didn't have to stay stuck where they were, no matter where they were, whether that was in addiction or in a, bad and violent or aggressive marriage, or, in a job that they hated. Like, no matter where people have found themselves, I wanted them to know that there was hope. And I wanted to come alongside them like I always did with that little boy in the sandbox when I was 4. And I look back over my life story and I see it so many times. And when I finished rehab, I remember saying to the guy who was the pastor of my church, like, I want to open a home for women who want to get off drugs and they just don't want to live on their own and they need to live somewhere, and, we can all just like get free together, And he was like, that's a great idea. I had no money, but I had this vision. And I believed that the vision was from heaven. And so somehow, miraculously, found a share house and rented out this house with 6 bedrooms so that women could come, so that they could see light, that they could taste freedom, that they could eat healthy food, that they could live together and find freedom. I realized then, that it was about using my story. I wanted to use my past to help change other people's futures. And I wanted to tell the story because I wanted them all to know that they too had a story, that there was hope, right? So anyway, I start that, and then people, became Christians and things were great. And then one person took drugs, and then everyone took drugs. And I found myself living in this big share house. A friend of mine moved in with her baby, who's now my 20-something-year-old goddaughter, and we had these spare rooms. And one of the guys that I went to rehab with moved in, and he was on and off drugs, but, he moved in, and we got drunk one night and had sex and got pregnant. He's like, oh crap, I guess we better get married. And then I didn't know what I know now, and I just thought that it was the right thing to do, and thankful that from that moment and that union came my firstborn daughter. We got married, and there are 2 other daughters, 3 jewels in my crown, who are now young adults. I live in what some would call an empty nest. I say I'm a bird releaser. But those girls and I have a shared history. And part of that shared history was, Grace was a 6-month-old baby rolling around on the floor, and I wrote my story. I thought I was writing my story for the sake of self-therapy. And then a pastor's wife came over one day after church, and she was like, God told me to edit your book. And I was like, I don't have a book, I have a story. And she said, you have a book, like your story is a book. We broke it down and broke it up into chapters, and she edited them one at a time. God bless her. And that book became Trophy of Grace, which came out in 2004. Grace was born, I wrote a book, I had another baby named Rebecca. The book came out, a year later I had another baby named Lauren. And so the babies were a part of my story, and the story was a part of my babies. And we didn't know any different. We didn't know any different than being together. We didn't know any different than weaving people together in community. And the year that Lauren was born, I had this vision to go back and reach the women that I used to be, the messed up, drug-addicted prostitutes, the homeless women, the people that didn't have hope. And gathered a bunch of volunteers from a bunch of, different denominations of churches, and hosted Valentine's Day. Also did Christmas in July, and that then became another Valentine's Day, and that then became me hearing this whisper from heaven to start a charity called Hope Foundation, with the idea, the concept, to come alongside women wanting life change from addictions and or the sex industry, with the message that they were loved, valued, created with a purpose. I didn't know that it took money to start a charity. I just had a vision. And like the house that I'd started for the women all those years before, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't have any money for this vision. I didn't understand that my vision was going to require really big miracle margins. And so I went to a friend who was a lawyer, and he, told him that I wanted to start a charity, and told him the name Hope Foundation, and he laughed and said, there's no way that name's not taken. And I am, however, still the founder of the charity that was known as the Hope Foundation. And between 2006 and 2019, I had the honor and privilege of coming alongside women that wanted life change, and fully and truly seeing them and really, really loving them. Holding them in these hugs that, the newbies would look at the older women like, what is happening here? And they would say, oh, you need to lean into her hug or she won't let you go. They were hugs from heaven. They were healing hugs from heaven. Years into starting the Hope Foundation and continuing for all of the years that I was a part of it, running those Valentine's Day and Christmas in July, and then any excuse for a party. So, we would have a Christmas party, we would have a this party, we would have a that party. And then in 2011, we opened the Hope Haven, which was a drop-in space for these women to come home. to be home. We hosted Bible studies, and once a month we hosted a birthday party. So if it was your birthday in that particular month, you came and you had cake and you were loved on and you were seen and you were celebrated. Some of those women would say, I've never been celebrated before. I've never had a birthday cake. And we passed on what had been a Healy family birthday tradition of birthday words, where you go around the table and you speak a word over that person, either that you know to be true or that you declare to be true. Birthday words. And we would seal it in prayer. And man, I saw people flourish from those parties. I saw people flourish in that Hope Haven. In the midst of that Hope Haven, I had another whisper from heaven to create a social enterprise cafe called the Lovewell Project, where these women that we were reaching could be retrained and reskilled and reintegrated into society, given a position, a job, a role, where they could take their role in our common purpose. Where those women would be treated with dignity and respect, and really treated like VIPs. If those women came up and showed their Hope Chick VIP card, then they got free coffees and free things, and it was their place. It was their place. I had a vision of this building on top of Mount Cravat Lookout, and I knew that heaven had declared it ours. And it didn't make any sense, and it was all miracle margin. It was all miracle margin. Didn't make any sense. He had me do things like apply to the Brisbane City Council for this thing with a business plan that I didn't even know how to write. When we won the tender, we had no money. We had less than money, really. And we were running the Hope Haven, and we were doing these outreaches, and we were loving on women, and he told me to do a crowdfunding campaign called 40K in 40 days. And everybody told me I was crazy. And we did it. And we did that, and we did that, and we did that, and we did that. And in 2016, the Lovewell Project opened on the top of Mount Cravat Lookout. So the Lovewell Project became known in community as basically heaven on earth. People didn't understand what was happening there, but they knew that it was something special. And, we declared coffee, food, and kindness. Changing the world one woman at a time, one coffee at a time. And we did. And we continued the Hope Haven, and women continued to have their lives transformed by being seen, known, and loved, and woven into this tapestry of love, and being encouraged to make their own choices. Their journeys were never our journey. Their stories were never our story. They were woven together in story, but it was their journey. Their journey. Everything changed for me 3 years into running that cafe. I was leaving the cafe to go and pick someone up for work, and I got to the bottom of the mountain at a set of lights I'd parked at how many times, and an old man pulled up behind me, and he braked, and then all of a sudden he accelerated, and when he went to reverse again, he accelerated again. And that was the 13th of August 2019. And it changed my life forever. It's left me with, for right now, an invisible injury that I'm believing for a miracle with. I had just come through a short and painful second marriage, and my divorce signatures were fresh. Then I had this car accident, and then the board that I had put in place at the charity that I'd founded, in my translation of the story, didn't treat me with the kindness that I felt like I deserved, but also would honor me in that season. And I ended up making a really hard decision after seeking legal advice and, the opinions of mentors and a lot of prayer, and living with chronic pain and living with 3 daughters that were looking to me to know what to do next. They were all working at the cafe at the time, and I got to the point where I had this mentor say to me, Bronwen, I feel like you have limited energy. You've run this charity for nearly 14 years, and as a mentor, I would say to people, what are you doing someone else could be doing, and what are you not doing that only you could do? Only I could be the girl's mum and walk us through and heal us through and lead us through a really brutal season of heartbreak. Only I could do that, and only I could rest my body. Nobody else could do that. Did I trust that somebody else could run the Hope Foundation the way that God had told me and carried me? Not necessarily. But the choice was a crossroads of I choose hope or I choose me. And I chose me. And I resigned from the charity that I'd founded in October 2019, and in doing so was severed, not by my choice, from a community of people who my kids and I didn't know any different than to be a part of, to love and to lead, but to be held by. And it was a very lonely, isolated season of loss and betrayal and more heartbreak on more heartbreak. There was corporate grief for my family. They all left the jobs at the cafe. My mum was living in aged care on the Gold Coast at the time, and in the midst of all of that, ended up moving to Brisbane to be closer to us. I didn't know if I'd get through. I didn't know any different than being a part of that world and having dreams and visions and imaginations for this community of women who I loved and love so dearly. I ended up working retail. I became a nanny for a 2-year-old little boy, 2 things I never thought that I would do as I pursued my own future and the next step in my own destiny by becoming a qualified counsellor. I remember telling my mum that I was resigning from the Hope Foundation, and she's like, you can't resign from the Hope Foundation, Bronwen, you are the Hope Foundation. You know? I also remember the day I told her I was going to study counselling, and my girls were in the room and they were like, good, then you can charge people for what you've been giving away for free. I don't know any different than to come alongside people and help them find treasure in their story. To be a counsellor means I can help people process their past, learn to live in the now, live in the present, and have hope for their future. So my entire life now makes even more sense. I had to trust, and I have had to trust, the chapters of my life into the hands of the greatest scriptwriter, the author of all creation, the author of me and my story, the one who hand-knitted, handcrafted me with this heart and this love for people. And I have had to entrust my days, my moments, my seconds sometimes, where he was the only constant, the only light, the only reason that I'm still here. And his loyal love, his kindness to me, has meant that along that journey, when I think about the highs, the lows, the ups, the downs, he's the only constant, the only thread. The thread of goodness and beauty and hope in my story, even in the darkest of days, blows my own mind. Getting to tell this story from this place of freedom in my own journey is mind-blowing. What an honor to hear myself tell my own story. Because ultimately he gets all the glory for my story. I think about the challenges that I've had as a wild, visionary, pioneer, entrepreneurial spirit, woman who's authored so far 3 books with many more to come. Stay tuned. A woman who has not just had to become, I've had to unbecome. I had to embrace the unraveling as a holy journey. I had to believe that it was him that had led me to the wilderness, and yet here I come out of the wilderness again, clinging to my beloved again. How many times can one person rise from the ashes even more beautiful? My past is not my future, and what I've done is not who I am, but who I am today is not who I was on that 15th of August 1999. But I've never lost the joy of my salvation. I don't forget where I come from, because if I do, I'm going to forget what to be thankful for. I can look back on every day and every second and every moment of that journey, and I can see His grace. And it gives me the hope to know that there is no one that I'm ever going to meet. There is no one that I'm ever going to meet who isn't going to be seen, known, and loved by me. It is the call on my life. To see, to know, to love, because that is what heaven did for me. And when heaven did that for me, it gave me a gift of hope. And so I can't not tell the story. I think about the challenges, the things that have come against me. Often people telling me my dreams were too big. My hope was too wild. There's no way that person would ever be saved, let alone live a life of transformation. But they did, over and over and over again. I'm a dreamer, but I'm also a doer. There are dreams on the inside of me now that I could have never imagined. Would they have come forth if I'd have not had a severing? Who knows? Would I be who I am without heartbreak and pain and betrayal in my story? Who knows? I'm never going to know, because that's not my story. My story is this. And my story matters. And the pain matters, and the brutal matters. Because if it wasn't for the brutal, I wouldn't understand the beautiful the way that I do. And I think it's given me a gift to see every person through eyes of grace with a heart full of hope. I've had people who have made me feel like that was a weakness, that my kindness was a weakness, that being my true full self was a weakness. But here I come again, rising from the ashes, with a knowing that I know that my hope, my eyes of grace, my willingness to see, know, and love, that's my superpower. That's my superpower. That's my superpower. And so the world better look out. Because I feel like the truest version of me I've ever been. The calmest version of me I've ever been. My kids would attest to that. The most peaceful. The most hopeful. I have loved and I've lost. A couple of years ago, I lost my mum, and she was my person. Through the good, bad, and ugly, my person. And yet, just like that Ed Sheeran lyric that I'm probably going to quote wrong, and my kids will roll their eyes when they see this, everyone will know who she is because of how I love. And imagine the people that are going to come after me in my story, who are going to know who they are and how to love because they were loved by me, because I was loved by him. What an honor and what a privilege to get to see, know, and love. My worth My purpose isn't about what I do. It's never been about what I do. It's about who I am. And I have unraveled and unbecome. And so it's almost like hi, my name's Bronwen Healy. I'd like to reintroduce myself to you. Here I am, future. I'm ready.
I wanna stroll along through a grassy field, stretch my arms out open wide. I wanna run with mercy back